All right, everybody, welcome to Succeeding in Game Audio Tips from a Global Pandemic. So we really appreciate you being here. And this talk is going to be all about sharing our different perspectives. We have four wonderful panelists here today, and we're going to be talking about things like subcontracting, branding, self-promotion, and building an audience. Each of us is going to come at this from a different angle, take what's useful to you and throw away the rest. This is basically all for you to take whatever you want and then, not use anything that you don't. So we'll be starting with yours truly. My name is Akash Thakar, and I've worked on games like Destiny, Hyperlight Drifter, Concrete Genie. As a sound designer, I've done 2 TED Talks, working on a game called Beastbreaker currently, and I'm also working on a bunch of NDA stuff, as is, typical for anyone in our field. So let's begin with building an audience. This is kind of the first thing that I want to bring to you. Now, a lot of us, when we're working in game audio, especially as freelancers, we tend to work with clients, right? We work with customers, we work with people who come to us, pay us to do a thing, and then that's the end of our relationship, or that's the end of at least that kind of working arrangement that we have. But what I want to kind of bring to you is the idea of building an audience. An audience is really kind of a group of people who are really interested in you. They're paying attention to you, meaning that you can teach them, you can share your stuff with them, and you can benefit each other. But this also helps with the ups and downs of freelancing. An audience is a group of people who are basically always paying attention to you, and they're always excited to see what you do next. Now, this is different from, your client base, because like I mentioned earlier, clients are people who pay you to work for them or have some sort of transaction to work with them, some sort of trade. You do your things together and then you go over on your merry ways. Maybe they hire you again in the future. Fantastic. That's great. But that's kind of how the client relationship tends to go. But if you have an audience, it means you have people who are literally paying attention to you all the time, or most of the time, or a lot of the time, meaning you don't get this kind of sporadic noticing from clients. You have people who are kind of interested in you 24/7. They want to know what you're going to do next. They're excited to see what you're going to do next. Anytime you release something, they want to be a part of it. They want to know more about it. They want to maybe buy it if that's a thing they can do. And having an audience, especially as a freelancer, means that you will be able to kind of weather the ups and downs of this kind of freelance life that so many game audio people do much, much better, especially during things like a global pandemic. It makes you a little more resilient to those ups and downs. Now, an audience lets you do things like build products, if that's something you want to do. Maybe you can sell sound effects libraries, or you can make courses or anything like that. It connects you to a really strong network because you have all these people who are regularly talking to you and that you're engaging with. It also raises your authority in your field, meaning that people will trust you much more because you have this audience. And when you have people who are genuinely interested in you, your authority increases, and people, clients could hire you much, much more because they see you being like, oh, this person's actually doing the thing. I'm going to reach out to them. It's much easier to have that trust in you when you have that audience. Now, a lot of companies that we look up to have audiences, things like Apple, Riot, or even people like Oprah. They have audiences. They have people who are really looking up to them and seeing what they do next. But you might be wondering, Akash, you delicious sticky bun, how do you build an audience? How do you go about doing this? So the first kind of starting point of this, and this is something you all know, is to show up. You need to be somewhere on a somewhat consistent basis. It could be in person when that happens again, or it could be online in places like social media, or even your own website or a newsletter or things like that. But showing up somewhere, wherever that is for you, consistently, is the first starting point of building this audience, because people need to know who you are to even follow you, to even be interested in you, to even want to engage with everything that you're putting out there for them. And of course, you do have to give everything away that you can. Share everything. Share your techniques, share your processes, share how you do what you do, share why you do what you do. That's really, really important. Basically, share everything that you can that isn't under NDA, right? That's what you really want to be doing, because one, that helps the industry as a whole, that helps other people grow, but it also helps people kind of know that you're a trustworthy source of whatever it is you're sharing, whatever it is you want to help people with. And when it comes to that kind of helping of other people, you might be thinking, okay, but there's already so much info out there. Other people are already talking about whatever it is that I do already so much. I can't really contribute to this. And maybe that's true in terms of just raw information, in terms of just step-by-step techniques. Basically, everything's already out there. There's tons of information out there. But even so, even with all that information, people are still asking for more and more and more every single day. They're asking maybe you specifically to share your different thoughts and processes and stuff like that. And that's because even though we live in kind of an information age where every single bit of info we want is in our pockets at any given time, very, very, very few people are sharing their perspective. It's very, very rare to see someone sharing the actual depth of why they do what they do, or how to do something from a deeper angle other than just information. Every single person we look up to nowadays, if it's a YouTuber, a speaker, someone in the game industry, anything like that, are the ones who share their perspective. It's not just raw information. It's not just raw step by step. It is a perspective. It's more than an opinion. Opinions are for Twitter. They're just kind of there to be angry. But if you share your perspective, something deeper, something more helpful, that's where you get your audience. That's where people start to latch on to you. Because again, if you just think off the top of your head, people you really like to learn from, it's because they have that perspective. But you might be thinking, I don't have time. I don't have time to be making stuff. And the thing is, you don't need to necessarily make stuff that is completely wholly original all the time. Gary Vaynerchuk, the patron saint of social media and sharing and building an audience, says, don't create, document. Now, basically, this means capture what you're already doing. So it could be that you're working in a DAW and you're writing some music, you're making some sounds. Screen capture or a screenshot is plenty to get started. It's much, much better than thinking, no one needs to learn this, and then kind of depriving the community as a whole from learning whatever it is that you're doing. And even starting off really simply is huge. That's massive. That's a really, really big part of this. Starting off simply, having the least friction possible when you're sharing your stuff, that makes a massive, massive difference. And this doesn't need to be every day, doesn't need to be every week, just somewhat consistently. Whenever you can, show up, give your stuff out, and help however you can. Now, at first, expect nothing in return from this, whether in person or online, expect nothing in return. This isn't really about you at first. It's about just helping other people. You can get money and sell to them later if that's something you even want to do. But really, at first, you want to expect nothing in return. And as you help more and more people, because it's the internet, if you are doing this online, people will get very, 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 very angry at you for sharing your stuff. That's awesome. That's a very good sign. When Twitter gets mad at you, A+, good job, because that means you're helping people. So expect nothing in return at first, and then things will grow. A lot of people that I talk about this process with will do this for a week and say, nothing's happening. It's only been a week. It takes time to build this up, and it takes step by step, just slowly but surely, doing all these steps of showing up and giving. Now, your audience, you might be thinking, okay, well, I'm not someone famous, I'm not huge or anything like that. That's fine. Your audience can and should be very tiny. It should be a niche. It doesn't need to be everybody in the game industry or everybody in your kind of field of game audio or whatever it may be. It can be very, very, very small. And in fact, it should be very, very, very small, because if it is, that means you can actually serve those people. If you're just, for example, a productivity expert, that's too broad. But if you're a productivity expert who helps creatives make stuff without feeling guilty throughout their day for not creating stuff all the time, 24/7, there you go. You now have a niche that is very small that people need. Now, you might be wondering how small is too small. Basically, you want your niche to be so small that it scares the hell out of you. You want it to actually be scary. You want to be thinking, I don't know if there's enough people in that niche. Good. That's exactly where you want to be. Because if you have a tiny niche, one, it means you're serving people. But two, it also means that you'll know what to help them with. Even if you're one page ahead of them in the book, it makes a huge difference. Even if you are slightly more knowledgeable, you don't have to be advanced. You don't have to be the greatest in the world. Just sharing what you know can be ultra helpful to your tiny tiny niche. And again, like I said, this could be any medium you want. It doesn't need to be gigantic. It doesn't need to be some sort of bombastic thing. It doesn't need to be a speech in front of 50,000 people. It can literally be just articles you write. It could be a newsletter. It could be Instagram videos. It could be pictures on Instagram. It could be just tweets. It could be anything like that. Whatever medium is most interesting to you right now is where you should start, and whatever has the least friction for you to start up and to do. It can be as easy as you want, and it should be really easy at first. Now, at first, you want to help. You might be thinking that you want to sell stuff to people, and that's great. There's nothing wrong with that. A lot of people want extra help. They want maybe a product or a sound effects library or something like that. That's great. But you can know what to sell to people, if that's something you're even interested in, by helping them first. They'll come to you with what their problems are. They'll come to you with their thoughts, their ideas of how you can help them. So help first. And then if that's something you even want to do, you can sell to them later. Now, as a last point, this is why I push this so much to so many people about sharing, about helping, about giving all your stuff away, is because there are people in your life, and you may know who they are and you may not, that can't be reached. They can't be influenced. They can't be motivated. They can't be pushed forward except by you. And there will be people that you will never, ever, ever know that you influence, that you could only influence. It's only you who could have reached those people. There will be thousands of people that you'll never meet that you influenced that no one else could. So that's why I'd love for you to start building an audience. I think you'll really like the impact and results you'll get from it.
Hey everybody, I'm Ryan Ike. I do music and sometimes sound design for games like these. And here's something I think we can all relate to. Don't you hate doing stuff? I know I do. I did stuff this morning and you know what? It sucked. For one thing, this pandemic kind of taught everybody that there's too much stuff and we all have to do too much of it. There's too many emotions to feel. There's too many things to process, tragedies to deal with. And if you weren't looking for work, it seems like you were doing more work than you had the resources and the time to manage. But it also did one slight good thing. Despite that, 2020 and the time after has kind of been the NFT of years, in that it was pointless and confusing and it did a lot of unneeded damage and it was the fucking worst. It did teach me and a lot of people a lesson, which is that we can actually get by pretty well by doing less stuff. I'm not able to make the slide move forward, but I'm going to keep going anyway. So what I'm talking about is this idea that you can make progress by simply doing less in your life. We are kind of overburdened, and I want to talk about this kind of idea of sort of getting rid of the chaff in your work and personal life so that you can make things smoother and easier for yourself. So let's talk a little bit about that. Now, I find a metaphor is helpful with things like these. You know, there's a lot of good metaphors for having balance in your life, you know, tending a garden or pruning a bonsai tree. But the one that I came up with was 3 balloons full of wet, wet mushroom fettuccine. And you know, before you say anything, like stop, because it's good. Actually, it's a good metaphor. I don't want to talk about why it's bad because it's good. So I just want you to imagine that you're walking down the street and you have these 3 balloons full of like nasty wet pasta that you carry with you all the time. And you can put them down your shirt, or you can carry them in the classic kind of like my son, he's very sick pose, kind of cradled to your chest. But the point is that you have these on you all the time. And let's talk about what these 3 balloons are in this very good metaphor that I'm doing right now. The first one is your professional balloon. And this is the balloon where you put your pasta that represents things like the quality and speed of your work, your ability to innovate, your ability to kind of come up with new ideas in your work, and also just your ability to handle marketing and networking and kind of all the just nitty gritty stuff that it takes to keep a business running. The second one is your emotional balloon. And this is for things like self-esteem, including your belief that your work is good and that it carries value and that people want it. It's also for things like empathy, both for just your fellow human beings in general, but also a thing I call creative empathy, which is your ability to sort of suss out what clients want from you creatively, even though you might not speak the same creative language, which is a really good skill to have. And the final one of these nasty wet pasta boys is your social balloon. This represents how long you can handle being around people if you're an introvert, or how long you can handle being away from them if you're an extrovert, how much time you get with friends and family and kind of your favorite people, and the bandwidth that you have to kind of process these big picture socially, forward issues like racial injustice, income inequality, environmentalism, that kind of thing. So what we find out is when these balloons get too full, they're harder to carry around with us. Again, I want to remind everybody at this point, this is a good metaphor, not a bad one. It's actually good. If any one of your balloons becomes kind of too flooded with life pasta, what happens is that it's really hard to move them around without damaging them or possibly dropping that one or one of the other two. Everything becomes unwieldy. And basically you're just more fatigued, you get less done, you're less effective, and you're not able to help other people very effectively. And I want to point out, this is the state that pretty much everybody has been in at least some point in 2020 and early 2021, if not the entire time. Pretty much this was most people's baseline. But what happens if things progress even further than that? Well, you sort of, one of your balloons bursts and you get what I call a spaghetti disaster. And at that point, what that means is you've let one of these areas of your life become so overburdened that now you're not just overwhelmed, you're doing damage to yourself psychologically or physically or emotionally, and you need time to recover from that damage. And that sets us even further back. So how do we avoid spilling a nasty pasta mess into the sidewalk that represents your life in this very good metaphor? We just got to do less stuff. We just have to get rid of some of the noodles. In the good metaphor, the noodles are the stuff you have to do. If it wasn't tracking, I know it was because it's good. I want to point out that doing less stuff isn't just as easy as just paring things away. It's hard. Society is bad and it wants us to be productive all the time, even during an unending stream of national tragedies, as we saw in the last year and a half. People who are completely like working themselves to exhaustion are still often praised and admired when they should be treated like they're maybe doing something unhealthy because they are. Then there's social and familial obligations. And then there's the fact that we just kind of feel bad when we try to pare down. Like, am I not working hard enough? Shouldn't I be busting my ass? Like, is this selfish? And that's all very valid. It can be very daunting. But the other half of this that I want to point out is that it's also accessible to do less. We actually all have a lot more capacity to do less stuff, to get some of the kind of chaff and unwanted things out of our professional and personal lives so that what's left behind is the stuff we want to do. The other things can thrive. It's just about getting over this mindset. And again, this isn't easy, but you can do it, that I should be doing more. I'm selfish or lazy or falling behind if I let things go. It's actually going to vault you forward in a way that trying to do everything absolutely can't do. So let's talk about some of the ways that we can do that. So the first one I like to call work smarter, not smarter. And this is about kind of examining your professional life and just seeing like, where are the spaces where you're getting in your own way? Pro tip right off the bat, just stop using vowels entirely when you type. Saves so much time. Everybody knows what you mean anyway. We've all seen apps. Who cares? But more importantly, it's about examining like your own professional habits. And this is kind of uncomfortable. So I understand this, but it's worth doing and going, where am I kind of causing friction for myself? And what can I do to fix that? Usually it's as simple as a tiny little tweak, or what some people might call like a life or a brain hack. I'll give you some examples. Because we all have these faults. I tend to, when I work on a single project or a component of a project for too long, say I'm going to work on one game for an entire day and then switch to another game tomorrow. I sit down to work and I look at that 8-hour block of time and I'm like, I have all day. And then I piss all of it away because I feel like I have forever. And then only in the last couple of hours, when suddenly that deadline of the end of the day is creeping up, do I go, oh no, and actually get some work done. Another problem that I tend to have is that I let my breaks spiral out of control. Taking breaks is great. You should absolutely do that. But I tend to watch like a YouTube video and then watch a related one and then open another tab. And it's just like, it gets out of control. So it's about looking for little things like that. Where are you kind of causing friction for yourself? And then what tiny thing can you change? Because it's usually tiny, to make it easier on yourself. So in the example of me wasting a lot of time when I work on one thing for an extended period, I'm very lucky. My wife is a project manager. She helped me just kind of split my schedule up into these tiny little blocks. So now I work on any one given project or component of a project for no more than like 3 hours at a time. Little block here, then switch to something else and switch to something else. And even though it's dumb, it tricks me into feeling like I have a series of deadlines coming up. So I'm always kind of on the ball because I have to move to something else soon. My thing with my breaks kind of spilling out of control. Again, it's as simple as just, I've learned I have to try to take a more meaningful break away from my space. Instead of watching a YouTube video or whatever at my desk, I'm going to go in the other room and play a dungeon in Final Fantasy XIV or read a chapter of a book, something that is a discrete block of content. When it's done, I feel like I got something accomplished on my break. I enjoyed myself, and then I come back. I'm much more likely to just get back to work instead of losing all that time. So it's about examining your professional habits and kind of going, all right, what are the bad habits I do and how can I block myself out of them? If you spend too much time messing around on the internet, which we all do, find ways to turn your internet off. I always recommend an app called Forest. That's really, really good for that. Lets you turn it off for a period of time. If you're a procrastinator and you tend to get distracted by chores while you're trying to solve a creative problem, I recommend going for a walk while you think about it. Where your dishes and your laundry and stuff can't get you distracted, they're at home. It's usually a simple thing like this, but you would be surprised how much more efficient you can get by kind of just clearing out all of these kind of bad habits that we do as best you can. And of course, we're all going to fall down on them. So moving on, another point that I yell about all the time, if you follow me on Twitter or Instagram, I'm always screaming about this, is that higher quality clients equals higher quality everything. So what do I mean by that? A high quality client, and this is not a comparison of two people's just inherent value as human beings, that would be gross. What I mean by high quality client is somebody who values your time and your skill and your talent, trusts you to use them well, and pays accordingly. So when you work with people like this, you have less revisions and edits to do, less of your time is wasted, you are treated with more respect, and you typically get paid more, so that you thus have to do less work in the interim between that project and other things. You can just support yourself with less work as a whole. These are really ideal. Instead of working for 3 people who don't pay you very well, don't respect your time, and ask for a lot of edits, you can work for 1 person who does the opposite of all that, and still get better results. It's great, and I recommend it. So how can we know if we have a high quality client or try to find them? Let's go through some of the options. First off is number 1, set boundaries all the time. When are you going to be typically available for work? Set your hours, even if you work from home. When are you going on vacation? When are you just not available entirely? How many edits or rounds of revisions do you typically offer before someone has to pay more money? A high quality client is used to this stuff and is going to probably respect your boundaries, whereas somebody who is a bit dicey or more likely to kind of take too much from you is going to push back on these all the time. That's always a good sign. Good things to do both with clients you have now and clients you are kind of interviewing for potential gigs. A second one, another thing I scream about all the time, charge more money. And for many of you listening and watching, I imagine I should actually say charge a lot more money. This is so scary. I know it feels like really counterintuitive, but high quality clients expect for talent and skill to cost a decent amount. They want something good. They know they have to pay a good rate to get it. That's how it typically works. So if you charge more money, you're going to find that, yes, you're going to scare a lot of people away. And that's really scary. And it feels like you're tossing away opportunities. But what you're actually doing is leaving space so that these high quality clients can see you and go, that person's charging a lot of money, and that's a professional rate. They're probably a professional. You'd be surprised how many jobs you can get by actually charging more money, not less. A third thing, look for red flags. You've probably noticed them, and just pay attention to them. We all kind of know when they're happening. If a client is taking a lot of your time, making unreasonable demands without much compensation, infringing on your personal space, it might be time to let them go. And my fourth and final point on this is that it's okay to let clients go. It's okay to fire clients who are taking a lot from you and not offering a lot in return. In fact, some of the best choices I've made in my career has been to let clients go who are doing this. It feels irresponsible at first. It feels like I'm giving up an opportunity, but you're really just making space so that you have room to work with somebody more awesome. It's really scary, but it's worth it. Speaking of money, my third point, as you can see on the slide now, just give it to other people to do the shit you don't want to do. One of the best things you can do as you're leveling up your career is hire people to do the stuff you don't want to do or that you're not great at and they're better than you at. So this can be things specific to your discipline, like as a composer, I don't really want to mix and master my own music all the time, or I definitely don't want to write out my own sheet music. Good God. But it's also stuff in your personal life that might need help, house cleaning or babysitting or an accountant to do your taxes once a year. I know, and I want to make this clear, we are all aware this is not a tool that's available to everybody all the time. Absolutely. If this is something you think you can do, I highly recommend looking at the spaces in your life where you go, God, I don't want to do that. I wish someone else would. And look into it. It's often more accessible than you think. Even getting someone to help once or twice a month is huge. If you can't afford this right now, that's completely okay and normal. But I recommend doing the same, looking at the spaces in your life where you could use help and thinking, okay, how can I build this into my growth? Maybe when you're setting your new rates for the year, what can I charge so that I can also have somebody do my taxes once a year or clean my house once a month? something to think about. It can help quite a bit, and it's more accessible than you think. Another thing, moving on to my next point. As creatives, we tend to run into a lot of unused content. We make stuff and then it doesn't get accepted, or it's not good enough, or it just doesn't fit the project. And we lose track of it, or we throw it away. And that's not great because that stuff is a gold mine. So save everything you've ever made, even if it's not accepted. You can use this stuff as inspiration for a future project. You can use this stuff in a future project half the time. If you make some tweaks to it so it fits the new thing, sometimes it works perfectly. You can use it in a demo reel or a portfolio. You can use it to help support a YouTube channel or a Twitch stream or a podcast you might be starting. There's all kinds of ways it can serve you. Moving on to social media. As you know, we all live in hell and we have to use social media to get anywhere professionally. And if you follow my Instagram, for example, you'll see that like 80% of everything I post is just old crap that I don't use anymore or never got to use. And I use that stuff to teach lessons about sound design and composition and, you know, just the process of making stuff. It's really easy content to make that, to Akash's point, helps and serves people, but I didn't have to make new music to show them that. So pretty easy way to go about it. Final point I want to get to is subcontracting, a new thing I learned. I use this picture of Banjo-Kazooie because what is Kazooie if not Banjo's subcontractor? He doesn't want to learn how to fly and poop eggs. He's going to hire someone to do that. It just makes sense. This is the first year I started subcontracting. I had too much sound design work to do, and I said, I need help. And I hired somebody very talented to help me with that stuff, and it was amazing. I thought it was going to be too expensive if I want to pay them a fair rate, which I do. But someone else's fair rate at a different point in their career is not the same as your fair rate now. In addition, many people might look at the opportunity to get their name on a high profile thing you might be working on and go, I'm willing to work for a little less to skip a couple steps in my career. That's huge. So again, not available to everybody, but something I highly recommend looking into. If you feel like you need help, or if you're looking for work and think you might be good at subcontracting, maybe you can offer somebody help who needs it. This is a really valuable way to cut a lot of clutter out of your life as a creative. So now you've got all this extra time in your hands and you've got space to meet new people, grow your relationships, work on new tools. And I'm going to pass things over to Kyle because he has quite a bit to say about
that. Hey there, I'm Kyle. I'm also a composer and sound designer. You can most often hear my work on Everbloom with Everbloom Games on original Minecraft Marketplace material. In addition to this, I was sound designer on Calico, arranger on the Zelda-themed Christmas album, A Merry Hyrule Christmas, and I'm actually B-side arranger for Grant Kirkhope on the upcoming indie game Hex Heroes. So jumping right on into it, the biggest thing that I took away from last year, initially as we started to transition to the online-only environment, is that I made the realization that I just simply was not happy with how I was presenting myself when it came to that online-only environment. And so I realized that I had too much music and I was writing too much personal music and I was growing a portfolio for what? I didn't really know at this point. And with all this extra time, I decided that I wanted to start working on other skills and start building other things into my portfolio. So actually, I made the realization that I actually wanted to stop writing music. And to this point, this might be one of the best personal decisions that I've actually made, oddly enough. And part of what I wanted to do is I wanted to start learning new skills in regards to all of this, specifically graphic design, motion graphics, and video editing. And kind of the reason for this is I actually want to start doing YouTube video essays on both game music and also business videos. And I've always really enjoyed video essays, and I've always really liked talking about, I've always really enjoyed talking about music. And so this was just something that I wanted to make also part of what I do to try to reach more people and to build a small audience, kind of like what Akash was talking about. And so I had a deadline in mind with this because it just so happened that my favorite game franchise happened to be releasing a new game on March 20th, Animal Crossing. And so I wanted to make sure I lined up my video with this. And so in regards to this, I wanted to set a kind of a notification in my head that my content was on the right track and I was putting the right idea into this. And that was, I wanted to receive a comment that said, this is the best first video essay I've ever seen. I knew it wasn't going to be perfect. I knew that there was going to be issues with it. But if I could at least get at least a comment that had said, this is the best first video essay I've ever seen, I would know that I am on the right track to starting to visually represent myself in a way that I wanted to in a new light. And I did end up getting a comment like that. It was something along the lines of like, this video has only 100 views and that's criminal. This has the quality of someone with 200,000. And that was a really cool thing to see because it did let me know that I was right on track with where I wanted to be. However, the interesting thing about this was that I actually still wasn't happy with what I was doing. And so I learned that iterating on what you do as you go either through a visual rebrand or as you're learning new skills is actually almost even more important, because the thing is, especially when you have a low viewership, people don't care. They're pretty interested in watching you grow and watching the growth. I got comments that were talking about how I was growing so quickly because I was iterating on what I was doing so quickly. On the top row of images here, you can see how my business video thumbnails changed over time. And on the bottom, you can see how my music video thumbnails changed over time. Eventually, I finally settled on a style that I felt screamed who I was, how I wanted to represent myself. And I used that style also for the video essays. It produced a higher quality video in the end, and it was actually way easier to edit and faster to do in the end. And the cool thing about this was this whole video essay experiment led me to being able to rebrand myself visually on social media a little bit better too. And the awesome thing about this is my partner is an excellent visual artist, and she had wanted to help me out throughout this because she was being motivated by watching me learn new skills. So she started increasing her artistic ability too as she went through this. You can see some examples as her art changed over time over the last, it was a couple of years for her, but you can see how her art changed over time and got better and better and better. And seeing her progress helped translate over for me in what I was doing. But among all of this, the biggest thing that I learned throughout this whole rebranding and new techniques that I was doing is that you need to make your content meaningful. Reaching just that one person was really what I was after with all of this, because I wanted to be able to help people learn new ideas. I had one comment that was talking about the ambience in Hollow Knight and how they never knew that the music and the ambience interplayed with each other so well, and that they would go back and try writing a soundtrack to the ambience of a game that they were working on. And getting ideas like that from me is what I was after, because in the future, I want to be able to get ideas from them too. So as you go through this visual, as you go through any type of rebranding or trying to figure out how you want to present yourself, never feel like you need to settle on what you're doing, because you can always change and always iterate on what you're doing. But the thing is, that was actually the smallest part of what I did last year. One of my other skills that I actually am pretty familiar with at this point is working on building communities and bringing people together. And so I actually wanted to focus a lot of my online networking in building a room that I could be happy with and be a part of, and bring other people, not necessarily into my room, but create a room of where they would all feel as if they were welcome. I had started a Discord server, Beats to Play Games to, shortly before the pandemic back in 2019 with some friends. And the whole point of the server was I wasn't necessarily happy that there wasn't a place that I felt truly was there for game music with zero forms of, I say gatekeeping, but I wouldn't necessarily call it gatekeeping. It was like they was behind hidden channels or subscription models or course fees. And I wanted something that was completely open, where composers had access to AAA composers, and people had access to their peers in ways that, might be a more community driven area other than Twitter. And so because of this, we made Beats to Play Games to a user-defined experience. We wanted to make sure that everyone did have these options. We have a mentorship program of which experienced people can be matched up with people who want help for one-on-one mentorship. We have a speaker series where we've had composers such as Mason Lieberman and Lena Rain come in and give talks for everybody in the server, completely open, completely free. We have people who come in the server and only want to talk about making music or talk about the business of music. They can get what they want out of it. And you'll find these people frequent these channels in trying to make sure that, they can get what they want out of it. And that's really the whole point of this, because we wanted to foster growth in meaningful ways. And going along with this, eventually I had some ideas about how I wanted to help provide leadership opportunities. And around this time, John Smith, our next speaker, asked me, how can I help? And I didn't know it at the time, but him asking me this question was probably the biggest change of my life in my career. And so we started talking about ways that we would be able to incorporate leadership into the server. And we ended up settling on different roles and expert positions of where they could help lead discussion, where we could have dedicated feedback teams to provide feedback on specific points of game audio. and where we could have people to help match people for mentorship, in addition to some other things such as well-being initiatives and networking initiatives. And so this right here allows it so that, you know, these people are given leadership roles to where they can help foster discussion and help other people feel more comfortable in the server. And the awesome thing about all of this that we helped build at this point was that this made community management really easy. On the bottom, we have the moderators and community organizers. They help support the mentors and the experts and the people who help lead other people, and they help and the core participators, they don't realize it necessarily, but they actually help the people who might not feel as comfortable or feel like, you know, maybe they aren't par enough, even though they are, to talk in the server. And what this does is it really makes a server autonomous. It never stops running, and we have very few moderation issues. And it's really cool because this is kind of the final goal that I wanted with this. I wanted to help build up this autonomous community that would always be running and that would always be supporting each other. And the awesome thing about all of this that I finally realized once it reached this autonomous stage is that everybody, I think, probably has their own networking style. I'm not the type of person who necessarily wants to go into a in-person event and break into a circle and feel awkward. That's not who I am necessarily. I like building communities. Beats to Play Games 2 is actually, I think, the 5th community that I've helped build at this point. That's something that really resonates with me and that I feel comfortable with. And so don't feel intimidated by networking because everybody says that, you know, well, you need a network to find music, games and or work in game music, which, you know, yeah, it's true. But don't subscribe to only one model of networking. Find something that works for you, that doesn't feel like work, because even though, you know, you might think that building a community up might be work, it doesn't feel like that necessarily for me. I enjoy it. Find something in networking that you truly enjoy. And for me, the side effect of this and the whole thing that I went through with John is that I also learned that I can't do everything alone. And finding a business partner is really, 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 really important at this point for me in my career. Eventually, from John's question of what can I do to help, him and I just kept talking to each other in regards to what we needed for the server, what we needed for each other's work, potentially, what we needed for other communications with other people. And we would actually have, you know, hour-long calls where we would just talk about what we could do for each other. And then eventually this kind of actualized when he ended up asking me to work on Calico with him, which to date has been the largest project that I've worked on. And so this whole idea of business partnerships has really helped me out in the end. It's really offloaded a lot of work for me, and I know it has for him too, because he's told me that. But the awesome thing in the end is that this has truly allowed for network crossover, because he's not my only business partner at this point, and I'm not his only business partner. And so we have direct access to each other's networks, which is really cool, because now our network is growing exponentially because we keep bringing in more people into what we're doing. And one of these people actually eventually brought up the idea of worker-owned co-ops to us. We had tossed the idea around with our good friend ZW Buckley, who had brought worker-owned co-ops in the regards of potentially starting a company together. And it was something that the three of us had talked about for a little bit. And we wanted to work on opening an audio house together because the three of us just really enjoyed working with each other that much and wanted to kind of formalize a partnership to not only help ourselves find new and better gigs, but to be able to help bring on other contractors to find better gigs and potentially to become member owners of the co-op also. And because of that, we have settled finally and are announcing Worlds End Audio, as far as we're aware, the world's first game audio co-op. The three starting members are ZW Buckley, John, and myself, and we are a completely member-owned co-op working in game audio, specializing in music, implementation, sound design, and whatever else may need be. And we have a full system of bylaws to bring on everybody, if they want, into being a contractor position, to be paid fairly for their work, and to eventually be member owners themselves. Community building is super, super, super important to me and to us. And so that's part of what we wanted to make this co-op about in the end. And really, for me, that's the whole point of what I learned last year. You know, I started with myself, but I really ended up with community. So my final point is find a community to get involved with, because my career at this point would not be the same. If you would like to join ours, you can find us at beatstoplaygames2.com. And I've been talking a lot about John, so I'm going to transition on over to him now. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so as Kyles was saying, I am John Smith. I'm a composer and sound designer working under the name Slide20XX. You might know me from my work on the Calico soundtrack, and I also did music for the Steven Universe anti-racism PSAs that came out earlier this year. Done a little bit of work with Rec Room and on other projects with other companies, and I'm also a composer, sound designer, and co-founder of my own game studio, Games Without Words. So, in 2020, everything went online. I have a slide. There it is. So everything went online. Like we were all stuck inside and we were using tools like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Discord, et cetera, et cetera. Essentially, because we couldn't be in person, we were forced to rely on social media as a way of putting our names out there, as a way of collaborating and cooperating with other people in the industry, as a way of getting to know new people, as a way of networking, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And when it comes to social media, I think a lot of composers, sound designers, audio professionals have a tendency to find that very, very intimidating. And the reason for that is because when we think of social media, we have a high tendency to focus on the media aspect of things without really understanding the social part, right? Like when we think about Facebook and Instagram, et cetera, this is what we think of. We think of the infinitely scrolling feed, and we think of the honest truth of the matter that social media is mostly noise, right? Like, what do we see? We see people self-promotion. Like I don't know why this is my favorite example, but skincare brands. I don't know. A lot of my Facebook friends keep starting skincare brands. And it's like, I love my friends, but I'm not necessarily that excited about their skincare brand, right? You think about your own self-promotion, excuse me. Like, I make music for video games. I'm very passionate about that. I know a lot of gamers who are very interested, and I know a lot of people from high school who like don't really care. They care about me, but they don't necessarily have this huge interest in like every piece of music that I'm putting out, right? Now, every now and then, there is that one thing that cuts through the noise of social media, right? But the honest truth of the matter is, even if it makes it into your life for a moment, like you don't necessarily keep that thing on your mind for the rest of your life. And this actually is my favorite example of that. So this is an album put out by a composer named Memo Demo. He's a wonderful composer. He's a fantastic person. But when I saw this tweet, I had no way of knowing any of those things, right? You know, I listened to the music and I thought it was interesting. I wanted to show support. I liked it. I retweeted it. And then I honestly forgot that Memo Demo existed, which is unfortunate because he's a great person, right? I didn't learn that until I actually had the opportunity to talk to him in a Zoom call that Akash invited me to. And I saw him there and I was interacting with him a little bit. And then Akash said, hey, here's another person that likes Sonic the Hedgehog. And I was like, whoa, wait a minute. Let me talk to this guy, right? And that's kind of the crux of what I'm saying here. Like, social media, it can be a little bit mystifying, but like the big secret to how to win at social media is to just talk to people, have conversations, build relationships, like get to know people, right? I absolutely love this picture from Steven Universe. And I think, you know, it kind of, I mean, this is kind of the point, right? Like figure out some words, say what a person would say, what a human might say, like a sentence, who knows, right? So I'll explain that a little bit, right? Like, ask a question like, hey, Twitter, composers, what are some of your favorite pieces of music or favorite composers, right? You ask that and someone says Beethoven. And then you say, oh, I like Beethoven too. Like, right now you're having a conversation, you're building a real relationship. Or offer someone a piece of advice or like something that you find useful that you think people might be interested in. So I remember Ryan Ike actually some time ago, he tweeted about Backblaze, this like backup software. Akash tells me that he told me about it too, but I don't remember. I'm sorry, Akash. But I did remember the tweet and I bookmarked the tweet. And then like, I don't know, several months later, I got online and I was like, oh, you know what? I think I'm ready to get this backup software. So I grabbed the tweet and I downloaded the software, checked it out, thought it was cool. And I tweeted back at Ryan and said, hey, I am on Team Backblaze now, which I do recommend. It is great, right? Or, you know, maybe you're funny. Maybe you like making jokes. You're a little trickster. You're a little jokey person. Excuse me. Anyway, like just have fun. I like to make jokes. Chipsel's Twitter is honestly amazing. And actually, funny story. I was like, I know that Chipsel's a great musician, right? I was vaguely aware of that. Like I'd heard a few pieces of music, but honestly, more than that, I just saw tweet after tweet after tweet of just hilarious. I just love it. It's so funny to me. And actually, one day I was like, Akash sent me a piece of Chipsels as a reference piece, and I listened to it, and of course it was fantastic because obviously Chipsel was great. But I was like, oh wow, listen to that! And I tweeted Chipsel and I said, hey, I love your tweets, but your music is really great. Which I think that's hilarious, right? She thought so too. I think she tweeted it out, right? So there you go. Like, just be a person and do things that people do. Like, and I'll come back to this. Don't worry, right? So, kind of continuing on the social media thing and kind of spinning off of what we've talked about a little bit today about like finding your own style, right? Like when it comes to being online and figuring out how like to conduct yourself, like they're really just do what you like and don't worry about what you don't. I hate Discord. I help manage a Discord community. I help run. There are a couple of servers where I'm like helping out. I don't like Discord. I'm sorry, I just don't. And this is the reason why. There are so many. What do I have in here? I have the communities that I help run. I have servers that I've started. I have like professional servers. I have personal. There's too many, so many. I can't do it. It's just too much. Okay. So this is what I do when I'm on Discord. I pick one channel, and like in Beats to Play Games too, that's the business channel, right? I pick one channel. Actually, I do want to say this. There's another Discord server where there's a channel and it's just called H, and all people do is they type the letter H. My favorite channel. I get on, I say H, and then I go live my life. I love it. One channel. And that is the channel that I live in. That's where you can find me. If you need me, tag me, because I'm not reading through all of it. I can't do it. It's not going to happen, right? Something else that I like, right? I like small, intimate networking. I like going out and getting lunch with like one other person or having like a small group of people that I speak to. So after a while of being in the business channel of Beats to Play Games too, I actually like hung out there long enough that I met some people that I thought were interesting. Like I liked their music. They seemed like cool people. So I DM'd them and I said, hey, I'm thinking about starting a small group chat where I can kind of get to know people a little bit better. I'd love to get to know you. Like, would you be interested in joining that group chat? So I said that to like a few other people. And then we ended up, kind of discovering that we were all interested in digital fusion as a genre of music. And we like ended up renaming the chat, and someone drew us this little picture, and it's just like a few of us. It's not even 6 people. 2 of those people are me. It's me, and then I have another account. We can talk about that later, right? Small groups, intimate networking, that's what I like to do, right? And kind of continuing on from that point. So, right, we talked about like what to say on social media. So I'll come back to that a little bit. So Ivy was one of the people that I had invited into this small little group chat. But the thing about the relationship that we've been building over time is that it honestly just started on Twitter maybe like 5 or 6 years ago. And that was, I had discovered Twitter. I remember when I was actually much younger, I wasn't in the game industry and I wanted to feel connected to it. So I got into this habit of getting on Twitter and finding like creators that I admired and game companies that I was interested in, and basically just following them. And every now and then, I would interact with someone on Twitter. Like, people tweet all the time, and you just find a tweet and just answer it, right? Like, and that phrasing makes it sound like this is an intentional thing that I'm doing, but really it's just like I open my phone up and someone says something and I'm like, oh, I'm going to respond to that, right? So over literally a period of like years and years, I would essentially end up doing this with Ivy's tweets. And like, to one example that I do remember is one day, for whatever reason, Ivy tweeted out that they were working on this piece of music and they had to get a ruler and like put it onto the screen to line up some MIDI notes, which when I heard that, I was like, what are you talking about? But then like 3 or 4, I don't even really remember when, but like many months later, many moons later, I was working on this piece of music and I was like trying to get it to work and it wasn't working. And then I was like, you know what? I need to get a ruler. And I got up and I got a ruler and I like had to line up some notes with this ruler. And then I tweeted at Ivy and I was like, hey, I had to do this ruler thing. Who would have thought? And like these are not high quality, like award-winning, like Twitter conversations, right? It's just a ruler, the music, like literally that's it. So, eventually, that was kind of how the relationship started. Eventually I invited Ivy into Beats to Play Games too. I asked them if they would be interested in having a one-on-one conversation with me, since that's, how I like to talk to people. I ended up inviting them into that small group. And then eventually, completely out of nowhere, like I had no knowledge that these anti-racism shorts were going to exist at all, obviously. And Ivy asked me like, hey, do you have time to do this? Of course I said yes, right? Because amazing. Like, I was so happy to work on this. And it really aligned with my values, which actually kind of will bring us into the next thing that I have to talk about. And well, we're talking about social media, so this is probably it's a time we can talk about trends. We can talk about social media trends, and we could talk about the fact that Black people were trending in 2020. It happened. I was there, and yeah, it's something that I have feelings about. Which, I mean, I have a lot of feelings about, and I shared those feelings on the internet, on Twitter, because like I mean, I don't know what to say. But I had an opportunity to be authentic, is kind of the point, right? Like, there was this thing that was happening in the world that I had feelings about, and that I felt that I had the emotional energy to actually discuss, right? Like, don't feel like you have to say everything about every single thing that's happening. I think Ryan's made the point that that's like impossible, right? But if there is something that is meaningful to you, don't be afraid to say how you feel about it, right? Like, this is an opportunity to show people who you are. And the good news about that is you're going to draw towards you the kinds of people that you want to know, the kinds of people who are interested in the things that you're interested in, who maybe can relate to the things that you're talking about, who are the kinds of people that you want to be in your life, that you want to be in your network. And you're going to push away the people who aren't interested, right? Like, I think there can be this fear of saying something that maybe someone might find offensive or like whatever. And yes, I do think there's definitely value in being polite and being kind. And yeah, I'm saying this because tone policing is like a whole nother conversation. But the point is, like, don't be afraid to have strong opinions and share them with people. And to that point, right, like, obviously I was able to do the anti-racism public service announcements, but I also actually was tweeting about my experience, and I'll even repeat the thing that I said, and that is that I grew up in the South, and I went to a public fine arts high school, actually, in sort of a racially diverse area. And to me, like, that's the kind of place that's like, you know, if you want to reach out to young people and diverse people and kind of create long-term change in the industry, like, this is kind of the perfect place to do it. I, for one, knew that I wanted to make music for video games when I was 13 years old. And I was just, you know, I was tweeting about it, and I was reflecting on the fact that, like, had anyone from the industry reached out to me when I was at that school, it could have had like a huge impact on my life and my career and et cetera, right? But I said that, and someone from a larger game studio actually saw the tweet and sent me an email and was like, hey, do you know how to make music in this style? I said yes, which is true. It is actually true. I'd never, you know, done it before, but I knew I could do it, and I did do it, and it was great. But this person, you know, they sent me this email. They were like, hey, can you do this? I, you know, said yes. We had a conversation, and I remember I asked them, like, what was it like? Why did you email me? And he said, well, I saw your tweet about how, like, if someone had given you a chance, like, how different things would have been. So I thought I would email you, right? And it turns out that I got to contribute to this video game that is, without saying too much, like, it is affiliated with like one of my favorite game franchises and one of my like favorite sort of creators of video games, right? And that is something that came about because I was putting myself out there and I was sharing like things that I'm passionate about, which, like, the other thing actually that I'll add to that is, like, social media and being online, it's really, it's a numbers game, right? Like, the more stuff that you put out there, the more likely it is that that one person will see it. Like, whether it's that one person that you can help, like Akash mentioned, or that one person who could give you an opportunity later, or like that one person who will maybe reply to your tweet, and then all of a sudden you're talking to each other all of the time and you've got yourself a business partner, right? So, like, just get out there and be yourself, essentially, right? Like, talk to people, share who you are, like, build real connections. Don't just, you know, flood Twitter with every single piece of music that you make. Like, actually have real conversations. If you feel like you're a community builder, go out and do that. Like, there's nothing wrong with having more communities. Like Akash said, there are some people who will be like right at home in your community versus being at home in someone else's. and like be authentic, be yourself, don't be afraid to have opinions, and don't be afraid to share them. And don't be afraid to offend people, because if you're saying like what's true to yourself and that offends someone, then that's just not a person that you're meant to know. Honestly, that's the way that I feel about it. Yeah, and kind of to close all of that up, so like we mentioned, Beats to Play Games 2 is this audio community that we are running. And we do have a diversity initiative. And sort of the first part of that initiative is that we started another server, the Black and Game Audio Discord server, which is basically an affiliate or like brother server, sister server, whatever, kind of one and the same with Beats to Play Games 2. But it's also a place for members of the Black community to get together and network and get to know each other. And it's a place for like, obviously the greater industry at large to like come and join us and hang out, right? Like if we're going to talk about these, you know, diversity in games issues, like here's one place where you can go and you will definitely find diverse people, right? And like, so come in and talk to people and build real relationships. Like I would prefer if people didn't just come in and drop a job and then leave, right? Like come in, talk to people, build real relationships. And like, that's how you'll find better collaborations anyway. So yeah, that's what I got to say about it.
So thank you all so much for coming and hanging out with us. I hope we were able to kind of give you some more perspective on how we kind of handled the pandemic and ways that you can kind of move forward, take what we talked about and kind of improve your ideas, your process. You can steal all of it and make it your own. That's kind of the whole point of all of this. So if you want to get in touch with any of us for any reason at all, please feel free to reach out. Here's all our contact info up here. Feel free to take a screenshot and reach out. Every time I give a talk, people will come up to me like 5 years later and be like, oh, I wanted to email you, but I was scared. Don't be scared. We're all nice. We're all sweet pumpkins. So feel free to just hit us up on any of these kind of socials or emails or anything like that at any time. And again, thank you so much for coming.